Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are happy to be back with everybody for a new installment in our supply chain chat series. Our topic today is an exciting one and one that many of our customers and prospects, folks that we talk to on a regular basis, can really relate to, and that is managing data bottlenecks and how GenBI is really unlocking data for demand planners. So I'm sure like everybody, you've been hearing a ton about Gen AI and now the newly emerging Gen BI, generative business intelligence. And we know that many supply chain professionals are still struggling with the best way to gain insight and optimum performance with their demand planning and just overall supply chain optimization and performance. GenBI is really emerging as one of the most innovative and transformative ways to manage for the best possible outcomes for your business with your demand and inventory planning. So on that note, today we have joining us David Warrick and Farhad Hussein to help me answer the question, how is GenBI unlocking data for demand planners? So guys, thank you so much for joining me today. How about we get the introductions out of the way? David, why don't you start?
Thanks, Karen. And as always, it's great to be here. And thank you so much for the invite. Farhad and I actually talk quite a lot on this topic offline. And Farhad's really at the pivotal edge of the next technology. So it's great to be able to actually have this conversation. So I've been in supply chain now for 30 years. That seems ridiculous based on how young I look, but yeah, it has been 30 years now. My early days were in Coca-Cola and high volume manufacturing. I took a deviation into construction for a few years and was a project engineer on the Hong Kong airport. So we built an island and we built an airport on top of it in the mid 90s. I joined Anderson Consulting, now known as Accenture, for a couple of years based out of the Dublin office. And did a lot of great process engineering work with Anderson Consulting. And then I joined Microsoft in 1999. Now, back in 1999, Bill Gates was still the CEO. There was really two products. There was Office and there was Windows. These were big box software, as we call them, with lots of manuals and lots of disks. But one of my early roles was on a new project called Xbox. And I was a project manager on that original project, setting up the supply chain for the original Xbox console. And then I ended up staying with Microsoft for 23 years in total, running global supply chain. I was part of the Nokia acquisition, the first build of the Surface products, and I retired in early 2022. My last couple of years at Microsoft, I had this crazy idea that the ERP system may have actually been holding back some of the supply chain goodness. And so I went to market and started looking for new and evolving solutions that solve specific supply chain problems. And this became, a real piece of interest for me. And so I was able to integrate some of those solutions back into Microsoft supply chain. And then when I retired, I wasn't 100% sure I'm still not sure what I want to be when I grow up, but it was very much focused on this wave of new technology, this amount of investment that was coming in to the supply chain world, and the ability to actually change how we traditionally worked in supply chain. And I work with Algo, I work with Interos. I'm employed by Overhaul. It's a supply chain security company based out of Austin, Texas. I work with a lot of incubators, with venture capital, with private equity, all trying to figure out the next wave of supply chain technology and do something amazing with it. So thank you so much for inviting me here today.
We're so happy to have you. I think it's over to you, Farhad. Yeah.
Well, it's a tough act to follow. But yeah, also really happy to be here. Good to see some familiar faces on the call, and excited to share some of the insights around generative BI. So for those who may not know me, I'm Farhad Hussein, co-founder and CEO here at BI. Started my career out of business school as a consultant, not Anderson Consulting, but at Deloitte. And I was an analyst consultant for them. And a lot of my time was helping large financial services institutions do that, heavy intensive data engineering work for them doing the SQL querying, doing a lot of ad hoc analysis across source systems. And through that experience, I just fell in love with software and being able to build products, and getting deep into data and finding the insights and trends. So after that, delve deep into product management and data engineering at the enterprise SaaS level, helping CPG and retailers find the insights and trends and opportunities within their data. And so that has been a rewarding experience, to say the least. And for the last year or so, starting back in January of 2024, started this mission with BI, and we're building an end-to-end generative BI platform where we're helping CPG companies and retailers and all these business teams to have AI empowerment through their organization to make decisions more confidently, reliably, and fit it right in within their workflows so we can minimize the change management required. So really excited to be here. Look forward to the discussion. And then I guess to start off, maybe David, we could talk about just setting the stage, like the foundations of AI and how supply chain practitioners should be thinking about this opportunity.
And that's probably my favorite question, Farhad. So to put it simply, Gen AI and now the evolving Gen BI, it actually means that all of your data problems are solved. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us on the call today, and very best wishes. No, only kidding. It may not actually be the fairy dust that everyone thinks it is, but that's actually okay. The opportunities are very real for supply chain, and think about this across demand, forecasting and planning, real-time logistics, inventory management, all of those things. The supply chains are filled with disparate data sources and disparate systems. They are unconnected, and the tools and the fragile ecosystem is actually prone to disruption, as we've seen certainly over the last 5 years. So being able to harness some of that data and interpret some of those signals in real time will actually allow supply chains to evolve in a way that just hasn't really been possible up until this point. When I talk about this, I always talk about it in the sense that for so long, the physical infrastructure of supply chain was ahead of the digital structure of supply chain. But over the last decade, and more importantly, over the last 5 years, what we've seen is that the digital supply chain has actually surpassed the physical supply chain. And that in itself opens up a huge amount of opportunity for what we can actually do next, and how do we actually evolve this industry into what it's supposed to be.
Right. Okay. So, David, does that mean data engineering is dead? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
There's definitely a quote there somewhere, Karen. I don't think of anything as being dead. I think about it as being reframed. Technology, as technology enables things, it forces a change. Like for example, the job of prompt engineer didn't exist 2 years ago, but now it's one of the most valued roles, if you like, coming out of Silicon Valley. And so I think with the beginnings of the work in Gen BI, a lot of what was once engineering's responsibility can now actually be transferred and be automated. This empowers business users to actually get things done. It's not about rip and replace. It's not about replacing data engineers, but actually enabling them to focus on other things and then adding business value overall in another way. And this to me is the core here is that Gen AI itself has been the democratization of a technology into the hands of people trying to solve business problems. And this is kind of, really interesting in terms of how I even act in normal life. So if an appliance in my home breaks, what used to happen was I would have to phone a service engineer. They would come out, they would tell me they'd never seen a problem like this before. It was going to cost me a lot of money. And eventually, through the different conversations, I would somehow get it fixed and feel good about it. But now if something breaks in my home, the first thing I actually do is consult YouTube. And I find a video of somebody who's fixed it or who's understood what was wrong. And I have a better understanding. It hasn't replaced the job of the service engineer, but it's actually helped inform me a lot better to ask better questions and to be able to make sure that I understand more about what's going on. So it's kind of that, it's my simple example of how to think about that changing in roles. The roles don't go away, they just reframe, and they get to focus on something which is even more important, which might actually add to, a different way of doing things and an advancement in supply chain. So when I think about GenBI, and Farhad's going to go into this more, I think about reporting in supply chain is traditionally static. I'm going to write some business requirements. I'm going to hand them off to a team of data engineers and developers who are going to produce a report. And I'm going to look at that report and instantly figure out the bit that I forgot to ask or the thing that I wasn't sure about. And all the while, my business is evolving and changing. With GenBI, this becomes a natural language replacement. So instead of waiting for reports to be published, I'm constantly in communication with my business and with my data. I get to ask questions the way that I ask questions to another person on my team or to another department that I work with in a very, very natural way. And so why do I get excited about this evolution? I get excited because the technology is enabling us to change and think in a different way. And Gen AI through Gen BI starts to actually make that a reality.
And I
Yeah.
think an interesting point there too is just, like why now, right? What makes the circumstances present that this is a great opportunity for organizations to leverage? And I do believe it's kind of been in the making, if you will, right? Now, with cloud computing and being able to have digitized information, like you said, David, everything's in the cloud and computes in the cloud. Now you can craft these experiences around your data where you can create reliability and outputs that make, that can drive action. And you can do so that's intuitive, that fits within the workflows of how people are used to working today. And I do believe that the whole consumerization of it, right? ChatGPT, Gemini, these tools that, like you said, people are using in their everyday lives. It's easy when you're using it day to day to think about, okay, in the business lens, what are some opportunities to make this more efficient? And how can I do this more in a productive way? And so I think you're seeing a proliferation of ideas. Now it's the
Right.
execution of those ideas that's important. And how do we help organizations execute well? Because I think people are eager to learn about how to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even David, even your comment about prompt engineers, not existing a couple of years ago. And I know, we've been saying for a while, at Algo, at BI too, I'm sure Farhad, it really just shortens the path between question and answer, right? In terms of leveraging Gen AI and Gen BI, and particularly when it comes to demand planning and efficiently running your supply chain. So thank you both for that. So Farhad, maybe you can share your thoughts on, the use cases for Gen BI when it comes to retailers and inventory optimization, logistics, that sort of side of things.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Karen. I think the way to think about it really is kind of reverse engineer the problem. So oftentimes in these customer conversations, what we like to do is start with the outcome, right? I think, organizations, right, key business leaders don't really care about the model so much, but are more driven about what outcomes could I drive by leveraging AI, right? And so we talk about that first, right? What are the key KPIs that are meaningful to you, right? What processes do you wish you could have the resources to do, but you're not doing today? And then you start having this conversation and you really uncover the pain points. And then from there, you can identify the systems of record that are in scope that house these critical pieces of information to make those decisions. And then you find a way to build upon that, right? I think everyone's been given the mandate, AI, 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 and well, people need to figure out how, right? And I think taking a crawl, walk, run approach is critical in these types of things. You know, David hit on something earlier on this call where it's not a rip and replace, right? Your data, there's so much intelligence that live within your four walls today, whether it's sitting in an ERP, a CRM, a WMS system, what have you. It's about packaging that data in a reliable way that's meaningful because you have structured data, you have unstructured data, and the difficulty is about bringing that together and then crafting an experience in an application where it's resonant to a business user and how they do work today, like a demand planner, a category manager, right? What are their workflows? We really want to understand that well so that we can embed AI in there as a co-pilot right today. And then eventually get to the stage of autopilot where it's helping you do actions. But in the spirit of crawl, walk, run, we'll get to those ideas in a second.
It's not Farhad. When I do think about that though, on the crawl, walk, run, I think it's important that people understand that the world and the way that they interact with the world is actually continually evolving around them. So I think about those applications that I use every day. So something like Spotify. So when you think about what Spotify does, it used to be I had a CD that I would put into my CD player, and then I would be able to only listen to that particular frame of music. And I think about that as that's a traditional supply chain report. It has a use, it has a defined playlist, and it's always there. And I have to go and put it into a specific player to be able to listen to it. And then I think about Spotify, and Spotify not only digitizes all of that music, it allows me to look at it in whatever way I want to look at it. And when I can't figure out how that should be, it generates its own playlists for me based on my historical context and the things that I've always listened to. So the applications that we use every day are actually getting smarter. I love like Spotify in December was actually generating your favorite playlist of 2024. I hadn't even thought about that. I hadn't even thought about a way to think about my listening patterns in that way. And it generated that. It was purely AI driven, but it reminded me that we are watching this evolution happen in everything else that we do. Why would we not also be pushing for that revolution from a work perspective?
Absolutely. And I think a critical piece there is the proactivity element right there you hinted on, is that a lot of these business intelligence platforms where, they might struggle with is kind of that cold start problem where, especially with the new skill set of prompting, where you're kind of, trying to rethink of how you approach these things. You're not used to interrogating your data with questions all the time. It's a new skill set. So how do you ease into that process? And I do believe there's, with the context of your data and your goals and opportunities that you're really focused on, you can really control the experience so that it can suggest some questions and opportunities for you to look into. So at least, turn some gears in the head of like, okay, these are the types of questions I have, this is the data available to me. Let me start diving in, right? And then you start getting used to it. But I think addressing that cold start problem is critical for organizations.
And Karen, this is an important point because even if you take the simplest consumer version here, which to me is a traditional search engine versus ChatGPT. If you type into a traditional search engine, and that can be Google or Bing or whatever you use, and you type in a simple question, something like, "What is a tree?" Okay, so not a complex question. The search engine brings back every type of response, and it is a lot of, if you like, unstructured data. So then you have to actually click through that to find the answer that you are looking for. With ChatGPT, I don't even type. I actually just ask, hey, what is a tree? And it brings me back a very clean definition. And then based on the reasoning of how it got to that definition, it prompts me with the next series of questions which it thinks I might be interested in. Now, I've just given an example of a question of 4 words. What is a tree? Imagine if you were able to do that from a demand planning perspective. Imagine if you were able to look at your data and ask that natural language question to get back the response without waiting for 5 people to generate a report, without then sifting through those reports, trying to make sense of them, without then trying to amalgamate that data to get the response that you're looking for. It's actually all there in front of you, and it's all accessible.
David, do you think we could take a step back and maybe talk a little bit about some definitions so that people can structure the conversation and start thinking about it, maybe some of the origins around AI? because you have some really good analogies that I think could really help frame this discussion.
So again, you know that this is one of my favorite talking points, Farhad. So thank you for giving me that hook. The first thing that I always get excited about is the democratization of Gen AI. So when you think back, in our lifetimes, it took somewhere in the region of 13 years for the internet as we know it today to reach the milestone of 100 million users. It took the mobile phone something like 8 years to reach 100 million users. It took Facebook 4 years to reach 100 million users. It took ChatGPT less than 6 weeks. This was the true evolution of technology. You didn't need anything specific to be able to run it. You didn't need to have any knowledge to be able to install it or to be able to leverage it. It was truly democratized and it was hands-on for everyone. Now, that is great in terms of the speed of deployment and the ability for everyone to actually use a technology in the first instance. Completely incredible. But when I then think about the evolution of AI, my favorite example is relating to the chess world. And I think about it, this has always been the great battle of man versus machine. Back to, IBM Big Blue beating Gary Kasparov back in the late 80s. There was a product developed called Stockfish, and Stockfish was going to be the ultimate chess champion. And Stockfish, in the simplest terms, was a lot of machine learning, but it was trained on every grandmaster game and every game of chess that had been played and recorded, and it was given all of that context and all of that knowledge, and sure enough, it became the chess champion. Then a little company out of the UK called DeepMind, which is now actually owned by Google, they approached it in a slightly different way. They said, rather than giving all of that detailed training knowledge, how about we just teach our version, which they call Alpha Zero. We're just going to teach it the rules of the game and let it self-learn how to play chess. It turned out it played chess in a very unconventional way, but guess what? It actually beat Stockfish straight out of the gate. After less than, I think it was 100 hours of training, it actually beat Stockfish. Now, of course, Stockfish has improved, and this continues to be a battle between Stockfish and AlphaZero. But it opened up something really interesting for me, which was the way that we traditionally look at data is very much based on how we've always looked at data, how we manage it. But what if we were to change that paradigm? And what if we were to say, well, rather than trying to understand based on the existing schemas, if we were to simply teach the rules of the game? And I think that what you've been doing in BI and some of the examples that you and I have walked through, Farhad, starts to make that a reality, which just blows my mind in terms of the perspective and the potential going forward.
No, absolutely. Like I said earlier on, it's all about the outcomes, right? So we start with the goals and objectives. What are those key KPIs? What are the use cases you're after? And you can set that context and framing for the models to have, right? And with those guardrails, it can then make its own decisions and find its own opportunities, scanning the metadata around your data, and it might uncover insights that you weren't even thinking about, right? Going back to your one-dimensional versus multi-dimensional way of looking at things. And at the very least, I can assure that it can start, seeing things at a different lens. It can spark that insight for organizations and do so reliably. So I think the key thing that organizations miss and where they could use help is in the deployment of it, right? There's a lot of data everywhere, whether it be in your Excel files, in your cloud data warehouses, your ERPs, what have you, or even in PDF documents, right? It's structured and unstructured. A lot of work and time has to be spent on that ELT or layer and like annotating that data, the attribute richness around that, so that when you do ask questions around your data, you can have reliable outputs, right? And that's why I think partnering on the layer one application layer, that's like the value there, is that you can bring that to life. It's not simply as, oh, can I feed this all into the context window and it figures itself out? No, you have to kind of set the rules of the game, right?
Right.
And then it can kind of contain that experience so that you can ensure the reliability. But it's also a balancing act. You don't want so much rigidity as well. You want to bake in a little bit of creativity in there in that experience so that you can have these, tangents and exploratory ideas when you're doing demand planning, right? Because I feel like in a demand planning workflow, it's all about being, things are changing, it's dynamic. You want to insert different data types and you want to do scenario planning, right? Like, okay, if this outcome happens, what do I do? Right. And having that conversation with a co-pilot where it can scan all these different data sources and compile it for you. And then you can react to it and do the creative human thinking around it, which is, which AI can't replace. Right.
Right.
That's where your time should be spent as a demand planner. Right. What are your thoughts around that?
I mean, I think that this is back to the point of the democratization. It is the fact that this is accessible and it is a different way of thinking about managing your data. The beauty about a lot of this is the fact that it isn't rip and replace. It's a layer on top of your existing architecture, irrespective of how good or bad that is. This is not trying to replace everything. This is actually layering on top and saying, we understand that you have disparate systems. We understand that you have disparate data sources. That's perfectly normal because a lot of these projects, and I hate even calling them projects, but a lot of these projects start with, we have to fix our data. Once we fix our data, then we can do X, Y, and Z. And I look at it and go, but if I didn't have to fix my data, and if I was able to leverage the power of the data that I've already created, because businesses continue to run, that like this is, can they run better? Can they be optimized? Absolutely. Can they have a different perspective? Of course, but they're still running today. So everything is not broken. But if you were able to take all of those disparate pieces and do something quite magical in terms of being able to understand your data at a different level and make better decisions because you can do that, wouldn't that be amazing? And it's not just for demand planners, it's for supply planners, it's for logisticians, it's for everybody in the supply chain has the ability to understand their own business at the next layer and interact with data as if it is a co-pilot, as if it is a person standing beside them, actually being able to answer questions.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think the one thing that I would add to that would be just making sure it's reliable, right? I think in these early days, I think you talk about this law where you kind of overestimate the advancements of technology in the near term, but underestimate it in the long term. And I think people are still figuring out the applications and how to do so reliably. And my point on the data piece, yes, the data can stay where it is, and that's the beauty of it. But then layering on top this intelligence of like, okay, what are the opportunities? How can we improve the data quality, right? Providing that visibility and then actually doing the action of that is very powerful in itself because that's a very resource intensive task that a lot of organizations struggle with day to day. And then it goes perfectly with an application experience where, okay, my data is in a better spot. I have my unstructured and structured data as context. Now downstream in a planning situation where, I'm doing this work, I have this co-pilot with me to do a lot of that data intensive work for me in a reliable way. And I think a way to build that trust, David, especially in this experience, is that be transparent, show the homework. I think it's not about, I know everyone's focused on automation, but I think it's, AI and human in the loop and it being kind of like a companionship of how getting those decisions through. And I think if you show the homework, allow, the demand planner to be in the loop, make tweaks, make decisions, and guide that experience, I think that will build trust over time. And yeah, that's how I think about it.
No, and thank you for reminding me of Amara's law. So Roy Amara was a futurist in Stanford in the 70s, and he coined that phrase. He said, we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And I think that everything we're seeing right now is We've been through some of the cycle already. This is AI is going to change everything. It's everybody's going to lose their job because AI will take over. And there was the general typical naysayers of this is just another thing. It's another blockchain. It's another RFID. But now what we're seeing is we're on that cusp. We're just at that point of inflection where we're starting to see evolutions like GenBI, which are starting to take the power of Gen AI and do something quite phenomenal with it. And that is part of that S-curve jump that we have to make as the technology evolves. But I'm still very much of the opinion that we haven't even scratched the surface. We're only on step one. And every week I see something new or a slight different twist on something that I've seen before. And it's incredibly exciting, but we're still going to make massive leaps in the future. And it's very hard sitting in, after 30 years of supply chain experience, looking to see how this is going to evolve. I tend to try and not limit myself because I think about it as supply chain is a living, breathing, thinking thing. It should be able to understand the disruption. It should be able to understand a weather event, and it should be able to act accordingly. And the way that it acts accordingly is through the power of Gen AI and Gen BI, whereby you go from understanding the activity to digitizing the process to ultimately digitizing the decision. And the machine is continually running, optimizing and understanding. And the human in the loop is able to be even more productive because they're able to interact with their data in a way that they've never been able to do before.
So guys, given all that, maybe Farhad, you could walk us through sort of the crawl, walk, run approach, for companies or teams who are really struggling to take the first steps. Where do they begin? What do they do?
No, thanks, Karen. So, my advice would be start with the use case, right? What is top of mind? What is a potential bottleneck in your organization? And oftentimes where the conversation lies is that it talks about automation, right? That's kind of low-hanging fruit where, hey, BI team, we're often facing with the challenge of, we're so backlogged with all these, data requests, right? We need to shorten the distance between questions and answers. A lot of those conversations start there, Karen, because if you think about the traditional workflows, at least the workflows that I was a part of, and I was actually the engineer doing on the other side of it, where you're getting all these BRDs and requests from business teams where they're looking at data at different lenses to drive decisions, and you're on the other side of like, okay, this is what they're looking for. These are the data points. You might not have the business context, right? You're just saying, I have to go after this data point, that data point, and craft a view and then create a dashboard so that they can review it. Well, as you can imagine, that workflow, translating business logic and language into code is a difficult skill, right? And weeks go by sometimes, if not months, from question to answer, right? And I think that experience, people are looking to find some efficiencies there where can you self-empower business users to get to the insights themselves, right? If you think about it, it should be contextualized to the persona. It shouldn't be static and we all look at the same dashboard. And maybe you still need that for your day-to-day operations, but for every person, they're responsible for a key division, a business unit, a category, what have you, and what they care about in the operational and financial KPIs, what they care about are different, and how they view things are different. And their experience with a generative BI platform should be contextualized to them and what they're looking to gain out of it, right? And get straight to the answers versus looking at static reporting. And now you're leveraging technology to do the heavy lifting, where you're spending more of your time on the creative decision making and in the moment decision making, looping in third-party data, first-party data, and letting AI do what it's good at finding the trends and opportunities, and then creating an output that resonates well for you, which oftentimes it's in a form of a dashboard, PowerPoint deck, whatever resonates to managers and senior leadership and CPG and retail companies today.
And I think that's an important point. I think that this move from static to dynamic. The ability to not rely on those, waiting for those reports to be produced so that you can make a decision, as we talked about earlier. This is the key element here. It is the fact that this is a very strategic move, but you've got to be comfortable with the technology, and you get comfortable with technology because it's widely available. Anybody can actually use ChatGPT. Anybody can use Copilot. Anybody can use, so many different engines are out there right now. But you have to get a little bit comfortable with what their capabilities are to understand how you can then use that type of thinking in the work that you're doing every day. And it should be that level of automation. The technology is democratized, so how do you then use that to the advantage of the industry to be able to proliferate some of the ways that people think? And it should be in that sense. And back to the Spotify example, it's the same way of thinking about the traditional GPS. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you had a physical map in the glove box of your car. If you were going to go anywhere. Then there was the original, Garmin, were digitized maps, and then that has evolved now into products like Waze. Waze just doesn't even tell me. Waze doesn't even let me decide. It actually gives me the options, and then it tells me if there's something in the way, and it allows me to dynamically change my route while I'm actually driving in the best interests of the solution that I've asked for, which is to get to a destination. And the next iteration will be, I will just tell my GPS where I want to go, and it will take me there in my autonomous car. And like this, the technology evolves around us, but yet when we approach it from a work perspective, we seem to be static in our thinking, instead of saying, wow, if I was able to think about my data in the way that the applications that I use to run my life actually think about my data, how would this differentiate?
Right. And so most companies, and particularly ones dealing with their supply chain and demand planning, we consider it in our line of work, the functions or the modules such as demand forecasting and inventory optimization, price and promotional planning, just overall sort of inventory management. So I think, there's lots of ways that a team can begin. I think that they just need to actually begin, right? So, did you guys have anything else to add in that regard in terms of the getting started, or have we sort of beaten that one to death?
No, I mean, I do think that the most important part of getting started is actually getting started. You do not want to boil the ocean on this one. You don't want to make it too complex. You just have to begin, and it actually doesn't matter. It actually really doesn't matter where you start, as long as you actually start. And I think, that is by far the most important message that I give to people, which is there's never been a better time to actually play with technology. This is super important. It's a super important time in our evolution, but don't be afraid. Like, you have to start somewhere, but don't let that be a barrier. Just start.
I'm sure
Yep.
some of the people on the call have an Excel file laying around where they're trying to make decisions off of it. And, I encourage them, right, safely, obviously. I mean, in a tool like generative BI platform like BI, where there's data security measures, you can do these experiments where you can just, in a safe setting, try asking questions and getting used to that experience. And then you can think about it. It's like, okay, the next step would be, can I connect my Salesforce? Can I connect my SAP to this? But even then, you want to focus on use cases, right? What is the use case you're after, right? Try to go backwards in the sense that start with the outcome, then go to the data, and then find the relevant data points. And then from there, you can start doing a controlled proof of value from this.
Yeah, and don't lose heart. I mean, look, the simplest use case right now for AI, which a lot of people are really playing on, is automation. So it's kind of like doing the things that we've always done in a new way. And what way is that? It's we're automating what a person has always done. And that's really good, and it optimizes your business, and it's great. But the innovation part of that is not doing old things in new ways. It's actually doing new things in new ways. And the technology already is enabling that. So when I think about Gen BI to me is doing new things in new ways. It's not just taking the schemas and the reporting structures that have always been there and automating them. It's actually taking a different step and saying, maybe there's a different way to think about the problem. And I think that is real innovation, and that leads to real evolution from a supply chain perspective.
Yeah.
Couldn't
Okay,
agree more.
well, I think that I've actually learned quite a lot today from you guys. You really are Gen AI and BI experts, so thank you so much. A quick recap on what we touched on. I think we all agree. We talked to a lot of different organizations, businesses, from enterprise to mid commercial. And I think that, a common thread is that everybody really is on this AI journey at a different stage. I think there's a lot of advances that everybody is excited about. And there's still so much more that's going to evolve, obviously, over time, and particularly in supply chain. I think we're really kind of at the forefront of it all. So it is really exciting to kind of consider where we'll be 12, 24 months from now. Doesn't matter where you start, but don't wait, get going. The technology is available to everybody today. And David, to your point, you're using in your personal life, your human life, it's as important to leverage it in our work life and business operations. So play with it, get excited by it, and see how you can evolve your team's performance and optimization. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity for everybody to sort of optimize, improve, and grow over time. And I know that's where our teams help out when it comes to our customers and the journeys that they're on. And conversations and dialogues like these really help to just sort of germinate some ideas for teams. So, some of the common questions that we get when we talk to people is, if I have a limited budget, what area do I tackle first? David, I don't know if you want to take that one, but I think you're probably going to say tackle something.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just go back to it and say, procrastination is the death of innovation. So I look at it and say, it actually doesn't matter. Start on a problem that needs to be fixed, and see where you get. If you make it 10% better, it's still better than it was when you started. So you have to try. And that is the most important thing. You can spend a lot of time analyzing, overanalyzing, and trying to think through the end goals and everything else. Technology moves too fast for that now. So jump in.
Yeah.
And roll up your sleeves and see what happens.
And the one thing I would add there, David, would be, if done correctly, right, leveraging generative BI partners, as the models get better, the performance and the application experience gets better, right? You get that benefit over time. And a lot of it's not just about being reliant on the output tokens created by these models, but the experience and the reliability and the productivity around it, right? And creating the workflows and fitting into these existing workflows. If you can do that right, then you can create an experience that over time, these organizations can benefit from the optimizations you see in generative AI models that are happening like every few months now that you're seeing.
That's a great point.
And the age-old question we've been hearing in technology companies for 20 plus years: what sort of ROI can I be expecting with these types of solutions? So, I don't know.
I don't think there's a silver bullet answer here. I think, it's very much so figuring it out. But what I will say is that a lot of these applications now are doing things in a transformative way, an AI first way, focusing on automation, which by and large drives costs down, right? So from an ROI perspective, you can enable these platforms to do a lot of the heavy lifting work for the fraction of the cost that, what was 5-10 years ago that you'd see in SaaS companies. And so I think you get a lot of value now because these applications are taking AI first strategies and they're doing a lot of valuable, meaningful work that translates to an ROI, right, from an efficiency standpoint. What that looks like, I think, is to be determined, but
Yeah.
It's there, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's, yeah, I think the important part on it, Karen, is that the I in ROI is much less than anything that has come before. So this isn't a huge systems implementation. This isn't a multi-year project. It's real time. It's easy to deploy. It's quick. So the I is already a small I. And so the return then, against that I becomes vastly different. That's why you have to begin.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, I think on that note, we wrapped it up with a bow. So well done to you guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. And we will share this recording. I know a lot of people maybe on a Friday afternoon didn't have a chance to join or stay through. So we will share it out through our email and our social channels so that everybody can